One day, a woman walks into a dentist's office and asks, "How much do you charge to extract a wisdom tooth?" $80, the dentist replies. $80? That's outrageous, the woman exclaims. Isn't there a cheaper option? Well, says the dentist, if we skip the anesthesia, I can bring the price down to $60. That's still too expensive, she groans. All right, the dentist continues, if I skip the anesthesia and just yank it out with a pair of pliers, I could do it for $20. The woman shakes her head. Still too much. The dentist thinks for a moment and says, Okay, if I let one of my students practice on you, we could get the price down to $10? The woman beams. Perfect. Can I book my mother-in-law for next Tuesday? A man visits his mother-in-law at the hospital, where she is in serious condition. On his way home, his wife, looking very worried, asks, So, how is my mom doing? He smiles and says, She looks great. She's in good health and she'll be fine for many more years. She'll be out of the hospital next week and come live with us. Forever. Surprised, the wife says, But wait, that's strange. Yesterday she seemed to be on her deathbed and the doctor said she only had a few days to live. The man shrugs and replies, Well, I don't know how she was yesterday, but when I got to the hospital today, the doctor said we should prepare for the worst. I've heard some people are really going crazy from isolation. I'm glad I'm not one of those. I've just been talking about it with the microwave and toaster while drinking coffee, and we all agreed things are getting bad. I didn't mention anything to the washing machine, though, as she puts a different spin on everything. Certainly not to the fridge, he's just been acting cold and distant. The sink said everything's going down the drain. In the end, the iron calmed me down, saying everything will be fine. The situation isn't that pressing. The vacuum, however, was very unsympathetic. Told me to just suck it up. The fan, on the other hand, was more optimistic and thought it would all soon blow over. The toilet looked a bit flushed when I asked for its opinion, and it didn't say anything. But the doorknob, he told me to get a grip. The front door called me unhinged. And the curtains, they just told me to pull myself together. For years, Frank's knees and elbows would start aching precisely at 8:50 a.m. and 8:50 p.m. At first, he thought it was just part of getting older, but after 5 years, the pain hadn't gone away, and he started getting concerned. He went from doctor to doctor, trying to find out what was causing it, but no one could give him an answer. Desperate, he even turned to alternative medicine and visited doctors running pill mills, but still no relief. The pain would return twice a day, every day, like clockwork. At his wit's end, Frank went to see a doctor in a filthy, run-down clinic. This doctor had been suspended multiple times and had lost every lawsuit against him, but Frank was out of options. He sat on the exam table in a thin paper gown and told the sleazy doctor, Every day, at exactly 8:50, I'm in pain. The best doctors in the state couldn't figure it out. The sleazy doctor, sitting in his stained lab coat with a filterless cigarette dangling from his mouth, glanced at Frank. After a long pause, he finally said, It's simple. You have 10 to 90. It was early morning, and an old man in his 80s got up and started putting on his coat. His wife looked at him and asked, Where are you going? He replied, I'm going to the doctor. Why? Are you sick? She asked. No, he said. I'm going to get me some of those new Viagra pills. At that, his wife slowly got up from her rocker and started putting on her sweater. He turned to her and asked, Where are you going? I'm going to the doctor, too, she said. Why? He asked. She looked him square in the eye and replied, If you're going to start using that rusty old thing again, then I'm going to get a tetanus shot. 2 attorneys boarded a flight out of Seattle. One sat by the window, the other in the middle seat. Just before takeoff, a physician boarded and took the aisle seat next to them. The physician kicked off his shoes, wiggled his toes, and settled in. The attorney by the window said, I think I'll get a Coke. No problem, the physician said. I'll grab it for you. While he was gone, one of the attorneys picked up the physician's shoe and spat in it. When the physician returned with the Coke, the other attorney said, That looks good. I'll have one too. Again, the physician went to fetch the drink, and while he was gone, the other attorney spat in the second shoe. The physician returned, slipped his feet into his shoes, and immediately knew what had happened. He looked at the attorneys and sighed, "How long must this go on? The fighting between our professions, the hatred, the animosity, the spitting in shoes and pissing in cokes." A man is strolling past a mental hospital when he suddenly remembers an important meeting. Unfortunately, his watch has stopped, and he can't tell if he's late or not. Then he notices a patient strolling within the hospital fence. The man calls out, "Pardon me, sir, do you have the time?" The patient replies, "One moment," and promptly throws himself on the ground. He pulls out a short stick, sticks it into the ground, and uses a carpenter's level to check if it is vertical. Then, with a compass, he locates north and measures the length of the shadow cast by the stick with a steel ruler. He quickly pulls out a slide rule from his pocket, does some rapid calculations, then packs up his tools and turns to the man, saying, "It is now precisely 3:29 p.m., provided today is August 16th, which I believe it is." The man is thoroughly impressed and adjusts his watch accordingly. Before leaving, he asks, "That was truly remarkable, but tell me, what do you do on a cloudy day or at night when the stick casts no shadow?" The patient shrugs and replies, "I suppose I'd just look at my watch." Some time ago, in a small village, there was a yearly tradition. The usually polite and God-fearing villagers would, for one day, participate in a competition of curses. On this day, everyone gathered in the village square to watch their fellow villagers go one by one on a little dais, trying to come up with the most foul and creative curses in the most flowing and natural manner possible. This year, however, things weren't going too well. While some were creative, no one had really impressed the village with their profanity. Most of it was just the same old stuff they had heard before. It was late in the afternoon, and all the promising talents had already gone. Now, it was time for the lesser talents, and Peter, known for his occasional creative curses, was called up. They called his name several times, but there was no answer. After a few minutes, they heard the door to the outhouse slam, and Peter came running up to the stage. As soon as he arrived, he launched into a tirade of profanity so intense, so vile, that the whole crowd took a step back. He was jumping up and down, spitting out curses so shocking that even the old men, experienced in the art of swearing, looked on in astonishment. Finally, the flow of curses ebbed. The villagers were left in stunned silence, staring at him in disbelief. Peter smiled brightly and said, "All right, got that darn zipper up. Now for the cursing." Some time ago, a man had 2 sons. As they grew older, it quickly became clear that Jackson was very sharp, while Blake was, well, about as sharp as a spoon. Both sons were loved deeply and cared for by their father. As time passed, the father fell ill and eventually passed away. Jackson, always busy with his work, called Blake to make arrangements. "Listen," he said, "I have an incredibly important business meeting, but I'll be on the first flight home. Here are my credit card details. Please make sure Dad looks his best and gets everything money can buy for his funeral. Spare no expense." Jackson wasn't sure this was the best idea, considering Blake's, well, Blakeness, but he had no one else to turn to. Surprisingly, Blake took care of everything, within a reasonable budget, no less. Jackson was pleasantly surprised, and the funeral went well, though it was, of course, a sad and emotional occasion. A few months later, Jackson called Blake again. "Listen," he began. "I don't want to accuse you of anything, but could it be that you're still using my card for about $300 each month? I noticed it on my credit report." "Of course not," Blake replied, sounding insulted. "I would never steal from you, you know that." "I know, I trust you," Jackson said. "But how do you explain these charges?" "Oh," Blake said, a pause in his voice. "I bet those are for Dad's tux. You told me to make sure he looked his best, so I rented the most expensive suit in town." It's a nice day at the university when members of the teaching staff, a physicist, a law professor, a political science professor, a chemist, and a statistician, walk into an office and discover the trash can is on fire. The political science professor quickly steps forward and says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything," and promptly exits the room. The physicist suggests, "We need to put the trash can in the fridge to lower the temperature below the ignition point, which will put the fire out." The chemist counters, "No, we need to cover the trash can to deprive the fire of oxygen, stopping the reaction from continuing." The law professor declares, "Please, stop blaming the victim. You haven't proven that the can is actually on fire yet." Meanwhile, the three professors turn around to find the statistician running around the room, setting everything else on fire. "What the heck are you doing?" they scream at him. "Getting a proper sample size," the statistician replies calmly. A blonde lived with two blonde roommates. She bought a new car, and on her way home from the dealership, she got caught in a terrible hailstorm. Her brand new car was dented all over. When she got home, she called the service department to ask what she should do. They offered to send the car to a mechanic, but she'd have to pay for it. She explained she had absolutely no money. "Couldn't you just send someone anyway?" she asked. The service chief, being a prankster, told her to wait until the car cooled down, then blow hard on the tailpipe. This would supposedly pop out all the dents. A half-hour later, her roommates saw her on her knees behind the car, blowing as hard as she could. They asked what she was doing, and she explained, adding, "But it's not working." One of her roommates shook her head and said, "You dummy! You have to roll up the windows first." A biology student working on his thesis about wasps is walking down the street when he passes a record store. In the window, he spots a record titled, "Wasps of the World and the Sounds They Make." Intrigued, he walks into the store and says to the shopkeeper, "I'll have that wasp record in the window, please. I've been studying so many wasps, I'll probably be able to identify every one of them." The shopkeeper nods politely, and the student buys the record, feeling quite proud of himself. When he gets home, he excitedly puts the record on. Pszzz, the record starts, but the student is stumped. He can't identify this particular wasp. He waits for the next track. Bzzz. The second track plays, but again, no clue which species it is. The student listens to the whole record, track after track, but he's still unsure. By the time he reaches the fifth track, he's frustrated and calls his professor over. The professor arrives, and the student explains, almost in tears, "I thought I was an expert by now, but I can't identify a single wasp on this whole record." The professor examines the record for a moment, then looks up and says, "Ah, I know what the problem is." "What? What is it?" the student asks eagerly. The professor replies, "You've got it on the B-side." A Texan is in London for business and decides to do some sightseeing before he leaves. He jumps into a taxi and asks the driver to show him around. As they drive past Big Ben, the driver mentions that it took 15 years to build. The Texan scoffs, "You Brits are so slow. In Texas, we'd build something twice the size in half the time." Next, they pass the Tower Bridge, and the driver remarks that it took only 8 years to complete. Again, the Texan scoffs, "That bridge is tiny. In Texas, we'd build a bridge twice as big in just a year or two." A little further on, they pass Buckingham Palace, but the driver doesn't comment on it. The Texan, puzzled, asks, "What's that then? I suppose that took you 100 years to build." The driver shakes his head and replies, "Sorry, mate, not sure what that one is. Wasn't here yesterday." A trucker walked into a truck stop coffee shop and placed his order. "I want 3 flat tires, a pair of headlights, and a pair of running boards." The brand new blonde waitress, not wanting to seem confused, went to the kitchen and asked the cook, "This guy out there just ordered 3 flat tires, a pair of headlights, and a pair of running boards. Does he think this place is an auto parts store?" The cook chuckled and replied, No. 3 flat tires means 3 pancakes. A pair of headlights is 2 eggs sunny side up. And running boards are 2 slices of crisp bacon. Oh, okay, the waitress said. She thought for a moment, then spooned up a bowl of beans and brought it to the trucker. The trucker looked at the bowl and asked, "What are the beans for, Blondie?" She smiled and said, "I thought while you're waiting for your flat tires, headlights, and running boards, you might as well gas up." One night, a man to his wife. The man, clearly puzzled, leaned closer to his wife and asked, "Hey, how did your breasts get so big overnight? And wait, where did your nipples go?" The woman glanced at him and sighed. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, shaking her head. "You've been drinking and sucking on the ass again?" A woman stumbles into a bar, clearly very inebriated, and approaches the bartender. "I'll have a whiskey sour," she slurs. The bartender looks at her and says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't serve you. You've had too much to drink." Disgruntled, the woman stumbles out the front door. A few minutes later, she walks in through the side entrance. "Barkeep, give me gin and ginger," she hiccups. The bartender, still patient, says, "As I told you before, I can't serve you. Would you like me to call a cab for you?" Looking confused, she shakes her head and stumbles out again. A few minutes later, she walks in the front door once more. "Give me a blue motorcycle," she demands. At this point, the bartender, losing his patience, says, "Ma'am, if you don't let me call you a cab, I'm going to have to call the police." She peers at him with bleary eyes and mumbles, "How many bars do you work at?" A timekeeper at a factory is responsible for blowing the whistle to signal the lunch break at noon. Every day, she looks at her watch, and right when it strikes 12 p.m., she blows the whistle. One day, she accidentally bumps her watch and worries that it might be off. Wanting to make sure she's doing her job correctly, she decides to take her watch to a professional clockmaker for calibration. The clockmaker adjusts her watch and assures her, "Don't worry, it's perfectly accurate. I set my watch by the clocks in the back of the shop. They're always on time because I set them every Sunday when the church bells ring at 6 a.m. Satisfied, the woman leaves the shop, but then she starts to wonder, how does the church know exactly when it's 6 a.m.? So, she goes to the church and asks the bell ringer, "How do you know when to ring the bells? How do you make sure it's the correct time?" The bell ringer replies, "I ring the bells right when my watch strikes 6 a.m. I'm sure my watch is accurate. I check it every day at noon, right when the factory blows the whistle for lunch." 3 new corpses are delivered to the morgue one day, each with a smile on their face. The mortician examines each body and explains who they are and their cause of death. "The first body," he says, "is a Frenchman aged 60. He died while making love to his mistress, hence the smile on his face. Second body," the mortician continues, "is an Irishman, aged 30. He won €1,000 in the lottery, spent it all on whiskey, and died of alcohol poisoning, hence the smile on his face." The inspector then asks, "What about the third body?" The mortician pauses for a moment before answering, This is the most interesting of all. This is Justin, aged 25, a flat earther. He was struck by lightning." The inspector asks, "Why is he smiling then?" The mortician responds, "He thought he was getting his picture taken." Several years ago, Andy was sentenced to prison. During his stay, he got along well with the guards and fellow inmates. The warden, seeing that Andy had a good heart, arranged for him to learn a trade while doing his time. After 3 years, Andy became one of the best carpenters in the local area. Often he was given weekend passes to do odd jobs for the community and always reported back to prison before Sunday night. One day, the warden was thinking about remodeling his kitchen. Although he had done most of the work himself, he lacked the skills to build a set of kitchen cupboards and a large countertop, which he had promised his wife. So he called Andy into his office and asked if he could finish the job. To the warden's surprise, Andy refused. "I'd love to help you," Andy said, "but counterfeiting is what got me into prison in the first place." A husband, addicted to smoking and drinking, ignored his wife's warnings. One day, she grew frustrated and told him, "If you keep smoking, all your intestines will fall out." He didn't believe her and continued his habits as usual. Determined to prove herself, the wife bought some intestines, snuck into the bedroom, and stuffed them in his underwear while he slept. A short time later, he woke up with a loud scream and fell silent for 30 minutes. When he finally came downstairs sweating profusely, his wife asked, "What happened?" He looked at her and said, "You were right. My intestines did fall out, but don't worry. After a lot of effort, I managed to push them back in." In the courtroom, the tension had been building all day as the trial unfolded. The young girl sat in the witness stand. Finally, the moment came when the judge leaned forward, his expression serious but gentle. "Tell us," he said, "Miss, when the alleged assault took place, how did you feel during the incident?" She looked up at the judge and said, "You know, Your Honor, it's funny. I felt a bit like someone who's being forced to eat a sweet. No matter how much they push it on you, it still tastes sweet, doesn't it?" A beggar knocked on the door of a house and called out, "Please give me something to eat." A man from inside the house replied, "My wife isn't home." The beggar, irritated, shouted back, "I asked for food, not your wife." One day, a miserly man's son accidentally swallowed a $100 bill. The father tried everything to retrieve the note, but nothing worked. Finally, a clever idea struck him. He took the child to the bank and said to the manager, "Sir, please deposit him into my account. There's a $100 bill in his stomach." A blonde woman received a text message that said, "If you're smart, send $200, and if you're wise, send $300. The blonde sent $500 and replied, "I'm both smart and wise. Gone are the days when jokes were made about us." After leaving the office, a woman realized she had left the car keys inside her vehicle. She went back and saw that the keys were indeed inside, but after searching the car thoroughly twice, she couldn't find them. She then thought they might be somewhere else, so she called the police to report the car stolen, admitting that she had left the keys inside. With a pounding heart, she called her husband, telling him the car had been stolen. Her husband, in a thunderous voice, said, "You fool! I dropped you off at the office." The woman thanked her lucky stars and said, "Come pick me up." Her husband replied, "Sure, but first I need to convince the police that I didn't steal your car." It's Soviet Russia, 1978, and Rabinovich is startled awake by a loud knock at the door. Groggily, he asks, "Who's there?" A stern voice answers, "Post office! Open up!" Rabinovich sighs, gets out of bed, and opens the door to find 2 KGB agents standing there. One of them holds an envelope. "Comrade Rabinovich," begins the first agent, "what is the best government system in the world?" "Why, communism, of course," Rabinovich replies with a forced smile. The second agent steps forward. "And which country has the highest standard of living?" "The Soviet Union, without question," Rabinovich answers, nodding earnestly. "And," says the first agent, narrowing his eyes, "which constitution best protects the rights of its citizens?" "Naturally, the Soviet Constitution," Rabinovich replies without hesitation. The second agent smirks. "Then perhaps you can explain, Comrade Rabinovich, why you recently applied for permission to emigrate to France?" Rabinovich sighs and shrugs. "Well, comrades, I heard they don't deliver the mail at 3 a.m. over there." A father was lecturing his son about the value of a good education. "Dad," the son asked, "what's the difference between a man with a college degree and one without?" "Well, son," the father replied, "both can do the same job, but the outcome depends on whether or not you have a degree." "How's that?" the son asked curiously. The father leaned in with a smirk. "If you rob someone without a college degree, you'll be caught, prosecuted as a criminal, and thrown in jail." "And if I rob someone with a college degree?" the son pressed. The father grinned. Then they'll call you special agent at the IRS. One Sunday morning, a young man strolled confidently into the local coffee shop, dressed sharply and radiating an air of superiority. He scanned the place with disdain before lazily waving over a waiter. "I'll have your freshest coffee," he demanded. "None of that leftover sludge you probably serve most of the time." The waiter politely assured him, "Sir, we brew fresh coffee multiple times a day." "I'll believe it when I taste it," the man scoffed. "I'm from New York. I know what real coffee tastes like. Honestly, I doubt you even know how to make it, but at least try, and make it fresh." The waiter, unfazed, disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a steaming cup. The man took a sip and immediately pulled a face of disgust. "Just as I thought. This isn't fresh at all," he sneered. "Go make me another one." The waiter headed back to the kitchen, taking his time to prepare a new batch. After a while, he returned with another steaming cup, its aroma wafting through the air. The man sipped, then spat it out dramatically. "This is even worse. This coffee tastes like mud." The waiter, looking genuinely surprised, replied, "But sir, it's fresh ground." 3 couples checked into a hotel for their honeymoons, and the man at the front desk decided to amuse himself with his usual game. When the first couple arrived, he asked the bride about her job. "I'm a maid," she replied. The desk clerk thought, "Maids are hot. This guy's honeymoon is going to be a breeze." The second couple stepped up, and he asked the same question. "I'm a nurse," said the bride. "Even better," thought the clerk. "Nurses are so sexy. This guy's in for a wild night." Then the third couple approached, and he posed the same question. "I'm a high school teacher," the bride answered. The desk clerk smirked to himself. "Teachers? Too strict. These two are probably going to bed early." An hour later, the first groom came down looking hungry. "All ready?" the clerk asked. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with your wife?" The groom sighed. "I tried, but she kept insisting on tidying up the room." Not long after, the second groom appeared, looking a bit frustrated. "Why are you down here so soon?" the clerk inquired. "Every time I tried to make a move, she kept telling me I wasn't clean enough," the groom grumbled. Hours passed, and the clerk kept an eye out for the third groom, but he never showed. Finally, near the end of his shift, the man saw the third groom shuffle into the lobby, looking absolutely exhausted. "There you are," the clerk said. "Rough night? Didn't you get any sleep?" The groom shook his head, his voice weary. "Not a wink. My wife kept saying, 'We're doing this again and again until you get it right.'" An Austrian maid approaches her employer, asking for a pay raise. The wife, visibly annoyed, decides to confront her about it. "Anna," the wife begins sharply, "what makes you think you deserve a raise?" "Madam, I have 3 reasons," Anna replies confidently. "The first is that I iron better than you." The wife, crossing her arms, snaps, "Who says you iron better than me?" "Your husband, he says so," Anna answers with a slight shrug. The wife narrows her eyes. "Oh, really? And what's the second reason?" "The second reason is that I cook better than you." "That's absurd. Who said you cook better than me?" the wife demands. "Your husband," Anna says matter-of-factly. Now fuming, the wife leans in closer. "And the third reason?" Anna takes a deep breath and declares, "I am better than you in bed." The wife's face turns crimson. Through clenched teeth, she growls, "And did my husband tell you that too?" Anna shakes her head calmly. "No, madam. The gardener did." A heavy silence hangs in the air before the wife sighs, grabs her checkbook, and mutters, "All right, Anna, how much do you want?" A man starts his first day as a trainee at a massive corporate company. Eager to assert himself, he picks up the phone, dials a number, and barks, "Get me a coffee now." A moment of silence is followed by a stern voice on the other end. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The trainee, unfazed, says, "No. Who is this?" "This is the CEO of the company, you idiot," snaps the voice. The trainee hesitates briefly, then fires back confidently. "Well, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The CEO growls, "No, I don't!" The trainee smirks. "Good." Click. A man calls home from work, but instead of his wife, a stranger answers. "Hello, who is this?" the man asks. "This is the maid," comes the reply. Confused, the man says, "Maid? We don't have a maid." The woman calmly replies, "I was hired this morning by the lady of the house." Suspicious now, the man presses, "Well, where is my wife?" "She's upstairs in the bedroom," says the maid. "And who's with her?" he demands. A man. I assumed it was you," she replies hesitantly. The man is furious. "What are they doing?" The maid, reluctant, admits, "To be honest, sir, they're sleeping together." The man sees red. "Listen closely," he says. "Do you want to make $50,000? "Yes," the maid answers quickly. "But what do I have to do?" "Go to the den, grab my gun from the desk, and shoot both of them. We'll make it look like a robbery." The maid hesitates, but then the man hears footsteps, followed by 2 loud gunshots. The maid comes back on the phone and asks, "All right, they're dead. What do you want me to do with the bodies?" The man, still furious, barks, "Throw them in the swimming pool." The maid pauses, "But there's no pool here." There's a long silence before the man mutters, "Wait, is this 555-4821?